The rumble of the road had become a part of me, a low thrum against my bones that had been constant for days now. I was on one of those sprawling, epic cross-country drives, the kind where you leave half your life in the rearview mirror and hope to find a better version of yourself somewhere on the horizon. My Honda CR-V, usually a reliable workhorse for grocery runs and weekend hikes, felt like a tiny, lonely spaceship hurtling through the vast, dark expanse of America. Mile markers blurred into a monotonous rhythm, the only true companions being the faint glow of the dashboard and the endless stream of podcasts I'd downloaded, dissecting everything from ancient history to true crime. I'd left Denver 3 days ago, aiming for the East Coast, a new job, and frankly, a new anything. My last relationship had fizzled out with the quiet inevitability of a dying ember, leaving behind a chill that I hadn't quite shaken. Moving felt like the only way to air out the stagnant corners of my soul, to strip away the familiarity that had become tinged with disappointment. So here I was, somewhere in the heartland, the specific state a blur in my memory, driving through a night so profoundly dark it felt ancient, only punctuated by the high beams of the occasional 18-wheeler roaring past. My eyes were starting to feel like sandpaper, and the caffeine from my last rest-stop coffee had long since worn off. I spotted the blue sign for an upcoming rest area, a beacon promising a brief respite from the relentless forward motion. It was probably around 2 or 3 in the morning, the kind of hour when the world feels hushed and heavy, like it's holding its breath. I signaled, turned off the main highway, and followed the curving access road into the parking lot. The place was surprisingly sparse. A couple of trucks idled, their engines a low hum in the stillness, and maybe 2 or 3 other passenger cars were scattered around. I pulled into a spot near the main building, killed the engine, and the sudden silence was almost deafening after hours of road noise. My shoulders slumped, a deep sigh escaping my lips as I stretched, feeling the stiffness in my neck and back. I just needed to walk around, splash some water on my face, and maybe grab another coffee, though the thought of more caffeine at this hour felt like a negotiation with my impending exhaustion. I reached for my phone, scrolling through messages that were mostly work-related or from my mom, asking if I'd eaten. I chuckled softly. The answer was usually yes at a gas station, but she didn't need to know that. As I opened my car door, pushing it out into the cool night air, that's when I saw him. He was parked 2 spots over in a beat-up but well-maintained Ford Bronco, the kind that looks like it's seen some serious adventures. The driver's side door was open, and he was just standing there, in his underwear. My brain did a quick, almost comical double-take, like, wait, did I just see that correctly? I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and looked again. Yep, white briefs, the classic kind, snug on him, and nothing else. He was lean, not overly muscular, but with a natural athletic build. Dark hair, tousled, and sleep must fell over his forehead. He stretched, arms reaching high above his head, and a ripple of muscles moved under his skin. The moonlight, surprisingly bright tonight, seemed to cling to him, casting his form in a soft, ethereal glow. My mouth felt a little dry. This wasn't something you saw every day at a highway rest stop. My initial thought wasn't shock or judgment, but a strange, immediate curiosity. Who does that? And why? He seemed completely oblivious to anyone else. Or perhaps he just didn't care. He leaned back against his Bronco, arms crossed over his chest, taking a deep, fortifying breath of the night air. His eyes were closed for a moment, head tilted up towards the vast, star-peppered sky. There was something incredibly vulnerable, yet utterly confident in his posture. He wasn't flaunting, he was just existing, being in his underwear, at a rest stop in the middle of nowhere. I found myself just staring, my hand still resting on my car door, half open. It felt rude, intrusive even, but I couldn't tear my gaze away. There was an honesty to it, a raw, unfiltered moment that felt entirely out of place in the sterile, functional world of a highway rest stop. He wasn't trying to be anything other than what he was in that exact second. And in my current state of existential flux, feeling like I was constantly trying to figure out who I was supposed to be next, that unpretentious ease was incredibly compelling. He finally opened his eyes, scanning the empty lot with a slow, deliberate gaze. My heart did a little skip when his eyes brushed over my car. I quickly looked away, pretending to be utterly engrossed in the faint glow of my phone screen, my cheeks heating up a bit. Had he seen me staring? Did he care? My internal monologue was suddenly a jumble of questions and self-consciousness. A few moments later, I heard the soft thud of his car door closing, then the click of the lock. I risked another glance. He was gone, presumably into the rest stop building. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Okay, Alex, get a grip. You're tired, you're lonely, and you just saw a semi-naked man in the moonlight. It's not a hallucination, but it's probably not a sign from the universe either. Still, the image of him lingered, a striking silhouette against the inky canvas of the night. It had pierced through the monotonous fog of my road trip, injecting a jolt of the unexpected. I finally swung my door fully open and stepped out, stretching my own stiff limbs, though considerably more clothed than my recent viewing pleasure. The air was cool, refreshing, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and distant pine. I walked towards the rest stop building, my mind still replaying the scene. He hadn't seemed particularly muscular in the intimidating way, but there was an inherent strength in his frame, a natural grace in his movements. And his hair. Dark, a little wavy, hinting at a texture I imagined would be soft to the touch. Okay, I was definitely overthinking this. Blame the sleep deprivation. Inside, the rest stop was brightly lit, a stark contrast to the darkness outside. The air conditioning hummed, and the smell of stale coffee mingled with industrial-strength cleaner. A few truckers were gathered around a vending machine, discussing routes, their voices low and gravelly. I headed straight for the men's room, splashing cold water on my face, trying to scrub away the lingering fatigue and the blush that still warmed my cheeks. When I emerged, feeling a little more human, I decided to brave the coffee machine. It was a glorified dispenser, spitting out lukewarm liquid that barely resembled coffee, but it was caffeine, and that was all that mattered right now. As I waited for my cup to fill, I glanced around. And there he was again. He was standing by the same machine, a cup already in his hand, chatting amiably with one of the truckers. He was wearing clothes now, a simple dark t-shirt and jeans, though they seemed to cling to his form in a way that still hinted at the body I'd just seen. He looked entirely normal, utterly unremarkable, yet my gaze kept snagging on him. His profile was sharp, a strong nose, a hint of stubble along his jawline, and his eyes. Even from this distance, they seemed to hold a certain warmth, a relaxed good humor. He laughed at something the trucker said, a low, easy sound that reached me even over the hum of the machines. And then, as if sensing my gaze, he turned. Our eyes met. My breath hitched. His eyes were a surprising shade of hazel, flecked with gold, and they crinkled at the corners when he smiled, a genuine, friendly smile that reached them. There was no hint of embarrassment or self-consciousness from him, no flicker of recognition that I was the guy who'd just seen him in his underwear. Or maybe he just didn't care. "Long drive?" he asked, his voice a pleasant baritone, surprisingly rich for the quiet of the rest stop. I was momentarily flustered, caught off guard by the direct address. Yeah, Denver to, well, East Coast. A ways yet?" I managed, feeling incredibly awkward. My coffee machine finally beeped, signaling it was done. I pulled the flimsy cup out, nearly spilling it. He chuckled again. "Sounds like an adventure. I'm just doing a quick loop, heading back north. Jacob, by the way." He extended a hand, his grip firm and warm. "Alex," I replied, shaking his hand, trying to project an air of calm I definitely wasn't feeling. His fingers were long, slightly calloused, a working man's hand. "Jacob," I repeated internally, testing the name. It suited him, simple and strong. "Rough night to be on the road, isn't it?" he observed, taking a sip of his coffee. Couldn't sleep, so I figured I'd get some fresh air. My AC in the Bronco decided to pack it in somewhere in Kansas, so it gets a little stuffy back there. Ah, the reason for the underwear. A wave of both relief and a strange disappointment washed over me. Relief because it wasn't some eccentric display, disappointment because the mystery had been solved so prosaically. But still, the image of him, simply stepping out into the cool night air in his briefs, just to breathe, just to feel, spoke volumes about a certain uninhibited comfort with himself. Yeah, I get stuffy, I agreed, fumbling for something else to say. I usually crack a window, but it's been pretty chilly. He nodded, those hazel eyes meeting mine again, holding them a moment longer than strictly necessary for polite conversation. You looked pretty out of it when you pulled in, had your eyes closed for a second there. I felt a fresh wave of heat creep up my neck. Had he been watching me too? Guilty as charged, I admitted, a small, embarrassed laugh escaping me. Coffee's my lifeline right now. I gestured to my own sad excuse for a beverage. Tell me about it, he said, taking another sip. This stuff is ambitious, but it does the job. He smiled, and it was a genuine, full smile that lit up his face, revealing a slight crinkle around his eyes. It was disarming. So, East Coast, he prompted, leaning casually against the vending machine. New start? I hesitated. This was usually where I gave the vague, polite answers. Something like that, I said, then found myself adding, left a job, left a few things behind. Needed a change of scenery. He listened, really listened, his gaze steady. There was no judgment, just an open curiosity. I get that, he said softly. Sometimes you just need to put some distance between yourself and everything. Reset the clock. His understanding was immediate and comforting. It felt like he saw more than just a tired guy at a rest stop. It felt like he saw a kindred spirit, someone else who understood the quiet desperation of needing to move on. Exactly, I said, a little surprised by how easily the word came out. What about you? Just a loop, you said? Yeah, just moving some equipment for a friend up near Omaha, then swinging back home to Wyoming. Got a little ranch out there. Nothing fancy, just enough land to keep me busy. His voice held a quiet pride when he spoke of his ranch. Wyoming, of course. It fit him. The outdoorsy Bronco, the relaxed demeanor, the easy comfort in his own skin, even in his underwear. He was probably the type who wasn't bothered by anything much. Wyoming, I mused. That's a big change from city life. He shrugged. It has its moments, quiet, peaceful, a lot of open sky. Keeps you grounded, I guess. He paused, then grinned. And you learn to appreciate the little things, like air conditioning that works. I laughed, a genuine, unforced laugh this time. Definitely. I'm thinking about setting up a tent in the parking lot myself, for the fresh air. The words were out before I could really think about them. A subtle nod to our earlier, unspoken encounter. His hazel eyes met mine, and this time there was a knowing glint, a spark of shared humor. You could always borrow my sleeping bag, he offered, a playful note in his voice. Might be more comfortable than your car seat. My heart did another little leap. Was he flirting, or just being friendly? It was hard to tell with him. He seemed so effortlessly open. I decided to lean into the ambiguity. That's a tempting offer, I said, feeling a smile spread across my face. But I think I'll stick to the coffee for now. Don't think my boss would appreciate me showing up to a new job looking like I've been camping. Fair enough, he conceded, taking another sip. New job, huh? What kind of work? Software development, I told him. Kind of a desk job, so this road trip is probably the most fresh air I'll get for a while. He nodded thoughtfully. Different world from mine. I'm mostly outside, fixing fences, wrangling livestock, that kind of thing. But it's good to have a purpose, whatever it is. We stood there for a few more minutes, sipping our lukewarm coffee. The sounds of the rest stop a gentle backdrop to our quiet conversation. We talked about the mundane, the price of gas, the best stretches of highway, the weirdest things we'd seen on the road. But underneath the surface, there was a current, an unspoken connection building, fueled by the late hour and the unexpectedness of our meeting. I found myself wanting to know more about him. What was it like living on a ranch in Wyoming? What were his dreams, his fears? He had this easy confidence about him, a groundedness that I found incredibly attractive, especially contrasted with my own restless uncertainty. And the image of him, standing under the moonlight, unself-consciously vulnerable in his underwear, kept flickering at the edge of my thoughts. It had created an instant intimacy, a sense of having witnessed something private and beautiful. "Well," he said, finally draining his cup and tossing it in a nearby bin, "I should probably try and get a few more hours of sleep before the sun comes up. Still got a long haul." My stomach tightened slightly, a pang of disappointment. I didn't want him to leave. This brief, improbable connection felt too good to just vanish into the night. "Yeah," I mumbled, doing the same with my cup. "Me too. Safe travels, Jacob." He turned to me and his smile softened, losing some of its easygoing charm and taking on something more direct, more personal. "You too, Alex. Hope the East Coast treats you well." He paused, his gaze lingering on mine for another beat. "And maybe," he added, his voice dropping slightly, "if you ever find yourself out in Wyoming and you need a break from that desk job, give me a shout. Always looking for a helping hand on the ranch." He didn't offer a number, didn't make it explicit. It was an open invitation, a possibility dangled, ethereal and fleeting, like the moonlight that had illuminated him earlier. It was enough. More than enough. "I just might do that," I said, my voice a little husky. My heart was thumping a steady rhythm against my ribs. He gave me one last smile, a quick nod, and then he was walking away, his gait easy and unhurried, disappearing through the doors and back into the cool night. I stood there for a moment longer. The bright lights of the rest stopped feeling suddenly too harsh, the hum of the machines too loud. The coffee, whatever meager effect it had, was gone, replaced by a buzzing energy that hummed through my veins. The interaction had lasted maybe 10 minutes, 15 at most, but it felt like hours had passed, like a small, precious universe had opened up and then quietly closed. Walking back to my car, the night air felt different now, sharper, more alive. The darkness wasn't quite so lonely. I slid back into the driver's seat, the leather still cool against my skin. I buckled up, started the engine, and the low rumble returned, but it no longer felt monotonous. As I pulled out of the rest stop back onto the highway, I glanced over at Jacob's Bronco. It was still there, a solid, dark shape under the distant glow of the rest stoplights. I wondered if he was already asleep, or if he was still thinking about our brief encounter. My mind raced, replaying every word, every glance. Was I reading too much into it? Probably. I was tired, I was on a lonely road trip, and any spark of human connection felt amplified. But there was something about Jacob, something so inherently him, that had resonated with a part of me I hadn't known was aching. His effortless comfort, his gentle understanding, the unexpected vulnerability of that initial sighting. It all coalesced into an image that was going to stick with me long after the miles dissolved the memory of this particular rest stop. The Wyoming offer. It was vague, yes, but it was there. A thread, however thin, connecting me to him. Was it just polite pleasantry, or was there something more behind those warm hazel eyes? I didn't know. But for the first time in a long time, the endless road ahead didn't feel quite so daunting. It felt like a path leading not just to a new job, but perhaps to something else entirely. Something I hadn't even known I was looking for until I saw a man step out of his car, under the moonlight, in just his underwear. The air still hummed with the electric current of the moment, the quiet reverberating around me like a physical thing. I was standing there, by my car, having just retreated from a bizarre, accidental public display of my undergarments. And Liam, that was his name, he'd told me in a low, amused voice, was still leaning against his pristine dark blue sedan, a small, knowing smile playing on his lips. My cheeks were still burning, a ridiculous heat spreading across my face despite the cool evening breeze. "Everything all right there, Romeo?" he'd asked, the amusement clear but not unkind. It was the kind of question that disarmed you, somehow, making the embarrassment less crushing and more human. I fumbled with the hem of my shirt, pulling it down self-consciously. "Yeah, fine, just—" A moment of profound stupidity, I guess. I tried for a laugh, but it came out a little strained. Long day, long drive, brains a little fried. He pushed off his car, taking a slow step towards me. My heart gave a little skip. He was taller than I'd initially registered, with broad shoulders and a lean build that spoke of quiet strength. His eyes, a warm hazel, seemed to hold a genuine spark of curiosity, not just the fleeting interest of a passing stranger. There was a kindness in them, a sort of gentle patience that made me feel seen rather than just observed. "Tell me about it," he said, his voice a smooth baritone. "I've been behind the wheel since before dawn. Just needed to stretch my legs and grab a proper coffee. This vending machine stuff is grim." He gestured vaguely towards the rest stop building, which looked even less appealing now that the sun had dipped below the horizon, bathing the parking lot in a dim orange glow from the sodium lamps. "You're right about the coffee," I agreed, feeling a tiny bit more at ease. "I think I'm running on fumes and the sheer will not to fall asleep at the wheel." He chuckled, a rich, warm sound that made a pleasant shiver run down my spine. "Hazard of the trade, huh? Or just a really long trip?" "A bit of both," I admitted, looking around the mostly empty lot. A few other cars were parked far off, but for the most part, it was just us, under the flickering lights, the quiet hum of distant traffic, the only soundtrack. "I'm heading west. Been on the road for 2 days now." "West, huh? Big move or just an adventure?" he asked, taking another step closer. He wasn't invading my space, but the proximity felt more intimate than I expected from a rest stop encounter. I hesitated. How much do you tell a stranger you just met while half naked? But there was something about Liam's open, non-judgmental gaze that made me want to talk. A bit of a big move, I suppose. New job, new city, starting over. The words felt heavier than I intended, hanging in the air between us. Liam's expression softened. "Starting over can be tough. Exciting, but tough." He paused, then offered a small, knowing smile. "I've been there, more than once." His admission, simple as it was, created an unexpected bridge between us. It wasn't just about the silly underwear incident anymore. It was about shared experiences, about the quiet anxieties of life transitions. "What about you?" I asked, keen to shift the focus from my own vulnerability. "What brings you to the land of stale coffee and questionable personal choices?" He laughed again, a sound that brightened the dim evening. "Just a delivery. Long haul for my company. I'll be looping back east tomorrow." He gestured to the side of his car, where I now noticed a subtle company logo on the door, something about specialized equipment transport. So, a professional driver. It made sense, given his calm demeanor and the well-maintained vehicle. "So you're not starting over?" I teased gently. "Not this time," he confirmed, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Though there have been plenty of this times in the past, life's a funny old thing, isn't it? Just when you think you've got it all figured out, it throws a curveball, or, in your case, a moment of spontaneous underwear-clad self-expression." I groaned, burying my face in my hands briefly. "Please, let's not talk about the underwear. It was an accident. I swear. I was just so hot and bothered, and I just forgot I wasn't wearing pants. Total lapse." He patted my shoulder, a light, reassuring touch that sent a pleasant warmth through me. "Hey, no judgment here. Happens to the best of us. Or maybe just to you. But it was definitely memorable." His smile lingered, genuinely amused, but also surprisingly gentle. "Look, if you're still feeling the effects of that long drive, maybe you should grab something more substantial than a protein bar, and a proper coffee. My treat, if you let me pick your brain about starting fresh, somewhere new." My brain was still trying to catch up. A stranger who had just seen me at my most ridiculous was offering to buy me coffee and food, wanting to talk. It was utterly unexpected, and a tiny spark of excitement flickered to life in my chest. "Are you sure?" I asked, still a bit disbelieving. "You don't have to." "Nonsense," he said, already heading towards the building. "It's the least I can do for someone who just provided me with the most entertaining sight of my entire journey. Besides, I could use the company." He glanced back over his shoulder, those warm hazel eyes meeting mine. "Unless you're keen on staring at the same four walls of your motel room all night?" The thought of my motel room, which I'd booked earlier, suddenly seemed incredibly unappealing. It was just another anonymous box on this long, anonymous journey. The idea of spending a little more time with Liam, whose presence felt anything but anonymous, was surprisingly tempting. "Okay," I said, a genuine smile finally breaking through my embarrassment. "A proper coffee sounds like heaven, and maybe a ridiculously unhealthy donut. It's a road trip, after all." He grinned. "Now you're talking. Lead the way, Mr. Westward Bound." Inside the rest stop, the fluorescent lights hummed with a sterile indifference that managed to dull the edges of the outside world. There was a small, independent coffee stand that somehow looked a cut above the vending machines, and a greasy spoon diner with worn vinyl booths. Liam steered us towards the coffee stand first. "What's your poison?" he asked, leaning against the counter. "Just a large black coffee, please," I replied, keeping it simple. "And do they have chocolate-glazed donuts?" The woman behind the counter, who looked perpetually tired, pointed vaguely to a display case. Liam saw my hesitation. "Go on," he urged. "You've earned it." I picked out a donut, feeling a childish delight. Liam ordered a latte, something with vanilla, I think, and a croissant. He paid, brushing off my attempts to split the cost with a wave of his hand. We found a small, unoccupied table in a corner, slightly away from the sporadic rush of other travelers. As I took a grateful sip of my coffee, the warmth spreading through me, I realized how tense I'd been. The coffee was strong, bitter, and exactly what I needed. The donut was sugary bliss. "So, Westward Bound," Liam began, leaning forward slightly, his gaze steady. "New job, you said. What kind of work?" I took a breath, feeling a knot loosen in my chest. This was it, the real conversation. Software development. I got a position with a startup in Portland. "Portland, huh? Heard good things. Craft beer, rain, and tech," he mused. "Sounds like a solid move." "It is," I agreed, though a part of me still felt a pang of uncertainty. It's a big step, leaving everything I know behind. My family, friends, my whole life, really. "That's the tough part, isn't it?" he said, stirring his latte. "The breaking away, the goodbyes. But sometimes it's necessary. You can't grow if you stay too comfortable." His words resonated deeply. That was exactly what I'd been telling myself for months, but hearing it from an almost stranger, someone who seemed to understand the weight of it, felt different. Exactly. I felt like I was stagnating, stuck in a rut. This job, this city, it's a chance to reinvent myself, I guess. "Reinvention is good," Liam said, his eyes distant for a moment, as if lost in his own memories. "It's scary, though. You shed one skin, and for a while you're just bare, exposed, like a crab before its new shell hardens." He looked at me, a small, knowing smile returning. "Or, like a guy standing in his underwear at a rest stop." I couldn't help but laugh, a genuine, hearty laugh this time. "Okay, fair point. You're never going to let me forget that, are you?" "Never," he confirmed, his eyes twinkling. "It's the best icebreaker I've ever had. But seriously, it takes guts to do what you're doing. To uproot your life, face the unknown. A lot of people talk about it, but very few actually do it." His sincerity was disarming. It felt good to be acknowledged, to have someone validate the quiet courage it took to make such a drastic change. "Thanks," I said, genuinely appreciative. It feels monumental sometimes, and overwhelming. Other times, it just feels like I'm running away from something. Running towards something is just as valid, sometimes more so, he countered gently. "What were you running from, if you don't mind me asking?" The question hung in the air, a delicate probe into my carefully constructed defenses. It wasn't accusatory, just curious. I took another sip of coffee, considering how much to reveal. A relationship that wasn't going anywhere, I confessed, the words tasting a little bitter. We'd been together for 5 years, 5 years of comfortable complacency. We loved each other, I think, but we weren't challenging each other. We weren't growing together. And I realized I was just coasting, letting life happen to me instead of making it happen. Liam listened intently, his gaze steady and empathetic. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer platitudes. He just listened. It was hard, I continued, feeling a strange release in speaking it aloud to someone new. Ending it, I mean. He was a good guy. It wasn't a messy breakup, no big fights or betrayals, just a quiet realization that we were on different paths, and I needed to find mine. That's often the hardest kind, Liam murmured, nodding slowly. The ones that aren't dramatic, but just fade, because there's no villain to blame, just two people who weren't meant to go the distance. It leaves you with a lot of questions, a lot of self-doubt. His insight surprised me. He truly understood. Exactly, I breathed. Did you have a similar experience? He leaned back in his chair, taking a slow sip of his latte. Yeah, he said, his voice a little softer now, a hint of something wistful in his eyes. I did, almost 10 years ago now. High school sweetheart, first serious relationship. Thought we'd be together forever. Then life happened. We went to different colleges, different cities, tried to make it work long distance, but it was just a slow, painful disconnect. We both changed, grew into different people. It took me a long time to realize that was okay, and that it wasn't a failure, just a natural evolution. There was a quiet strength in his voice, a resilience that spoke of lessons learned and wounds healed. It made him even more appealing. This man who understood the complexities of relationships and personal growth. So, is that when you started reinventing yourself? I asked, intrigued. He smiled, a genuine, open smile that reached his eyes. Pretty much. That's when I realized I needed to figure out who Liam was, not who Liam was with him. Took some traveling, some bad decisions, some good decisions, found this driving job. It's solitary, sure, but it gives me a lot of time to think, and to see the country, and to meet interesting people in various states of undress at rest stops. I laughed again, feeling a lightness that hadn't been there in weeks, maybe months. It was a relief. This easy banter, this shared vulnerability. It felt right. So, what's your vision for Jacob 2.0? He asked, his gaze gentle but probing. What are you hoping to find in Portland? Honestly, I admitted, feeling completely comfortable confiding in him. I'm not entirely sure. I want to build something new, professionally, challenge myself, and personally, I want to meet people who inspire me, who make me think, who make me feel. I want to fall in love again, but not the comfortable kind. The exciting, passionate, growth-oriented kind of love. His eyes met mine, and for a long moment, the world outside our small table seemed to fade away. The hum of the fluorescent lights, the clatter of dishes from the diner, the distant drone of traffic. It all receded. There was just us, and the unspoken understanding that flowed between us. That's a beautiful vision, Jacob, he said, his voice a low rumble, and I think you're going to find it. You strike me as the kind of person who goes after what he wants, even if it's scary, even if he gets caught in his underwear along the way. I felt a blush creep up my neck again, but this time it was laced with warmth, not embarrassment. Maybe, I admitted, a little shyly. It's been a long time since I felt like I knew what I wanted. This trip, it's supposed to be a journey of discovery, I guess. Every journey is, Liam mused, taking the last bite of his croissant. Even a cross-country delivery trip. You never know what you'll find around the next bend. We fell into a comfortable silence then, sipping our coffee, just enjoying each other's presence. I found myself studying him more closely. His hands, resting on the table, were strong and capable, with well-kept nails. A faint scar cut across his left eyebrow, giving him a touch of rugged charm. His short, dark hair was neatly styled, but a few errant strands fell across his forehead, making him seem a little less polished, a little more approachable. "So, after Portland, what's next for Jacob 2.0?" he asked, breaking the silence. "After Portland, I'm hoping to find my rhythm, get settled, maybe explore the Pacific Northwest. There's so much I haven't seen." I paused, then added, "I've always wanted to learn to surf, but I've never lived close enough to the ocean." Liam's eyes lit up. "Surfing? That's ambitious. I tried it once, on a trip to Hawaii. Ended up swallowing half the Pacific Ocean. But it was exhilarating." He laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "If you ever make it to the West Coast, give it a shot. You might be a natural." "You've been to Hawaii?" I asked, feeling a surge of curiosity. "You really have seen a lot." "Some," he admitted, shrugging modestly. "The job takes me to some interesting places. I try to make the most of it when I'm not on a tight schedule. Explore a little, see the sights." "That's incredible," I said, genuinely impressed. "I've always wanted to travel more, but I've been so rooted. First with school, then with my ex, then with the job. It felt like there was never the right time." "There's never a perfect time for anything, Jacob," he said, leaning forward again, his gaze intense. "You just have to decide it's time, and then you go. Otherwise, you'll look back and realize you've wasted years waiting for a green light that never comes." His words struck a chord, a powerful echo of my own recent realizations. It was as if he was speaking directly to the part of me that still harbored doubts, still worried about the unknown. "You're right," I said, looking down at my empty coffee cup. "That's exactly what I realized, and that's why I'm here, on this road, heading west." We talked for what felt like hours, but was probably only an hour and a half. We discussed books we loved, movies that had moved us, the absurdities of modern life, the quiet beauty of a sunrise. He told me about growing up in a small town in upstate New York, his dreams of being an architect before life pulled him in a different direction. I shared anecdotes from my university days, my early struggles with coding, the eccentricities of my family. It was easy, flowing, utterly captivating. I felt like I was unwrapping a present with each new piece of information he shared, and in turn, I found myself opening up in ways I hadn't with anyone in a long time. There was no pressure, no expectation, just a genuine exchange of stories and perspectives. As the rest stop began to grow quieter, the last few travelers drifting off to their rooms or back onto the highway, Liam glanced at his watch. A small sigh escaped him. "Looks like I should probably try and get a few hours' sleep before I hit the road again," he said, his voice tinged with regret. "Early start tomorrow." My heart sank a little. The magic of the conversation, the unexpected connection, had made me forget the temporary nature of our meeting. We were two ships passing in the night, or rather, two cars refueling at the same desolate port. "Right," I said, trying to sound nonchalant. "Me too. Got a few more hours of driving tomorrow to get to Portland." We stood up, gathering our empty cups and wrappers. The short walk to the trash bin felt like a significant journey. The silence that now enveloped us wasn't awkward, but it was laden with an unspoken question. What next? As we walked back towards our cars, the cool night air felt sharper, the distance between us suddenly more pronounced. "Jacob," Liam said, stopping by my car. He didn't lean against it this time. He stood tall, his hands in his pockets, his gaze direct and earnest. "It was really good meeting you. Unexpected, but really good." "You too, Liam," I replied, my voice a little softer than I intended. "Definitely unexpected. And thank you for the coffee and the company, and for not judging my fashion choices." I tried for a light-hearted tone, but my eyes were scanning his face, trying to commit every detail to memory. He smiled, a gentle, understanding smile. Like I said, memorable. And honestly, it made the rest of the conversation even better. It was a good reminder not to take myself too seriously. There was a moment then, a pause that stretched, filled with unspoken thoughts and desires. I wanted to ask him for his number. I wanted to suggest we meet again, even though he was heading east and I was heading west. The practicalities screamed against it, but the feeling in my chest, that quiet, insistent hum of connection, urged me on. But I hesitated. Was it too soon? Was it too much, given the circumstances? I didn't want to spoil the purity of what we'd shared with the awkwardness of a rejected proposition. Liam seemed to sense my internal debate. He reached out, gently touching my arm, his fingers warm against my skin. "Look, Jacob," he began, his voice dropping to a softer tone. "I know this is a long shot, given our paths, but I'd really like to keep talking to you." My breath caught in my throat. He wanted to. He wanted to. The relief that washed over me was almost dizzying. "I'd like that too, Liam," I said, meeting his gaze directly. A genuine smile, one that reached my eyes and crinkled the corners, bloomed on my face. A lot. He pulled out his phone, a small, practical device. "Give me your number." I quickly rattled off my digits, my fingers trembling slightly as I watched him type it in. He then dialed it, and my phone buzzed in my pocket. "Just so you have mine," he explained, a small, satisfied smile playing on his lips. "I'm an old-fashioned kind of guy, still like a good old phone call. Or texts, if that's your style." "Texts are good," I managed, my voice a little shaky with excitement. "Calls are good too, both." I was probably babbling, but I didn't care. He put his phone away, then extended his hand. "Well, Jacob, it was an absolute pleasure. Drive safe tomorrow." I took his hand, and his grip was firm, warm, sending another jolt through me. It wasn't just a handshake, it was a lingering connection, a silent promise. My thumb instinctively brushed against the back of his hand, a small, innocent gesture, but one that felt charged with meaning. "You too, Liam," I said, looking into his hazel eyes, which seemed to hold a deeper warmth now. "Seriously, thank you for everything." He nodded, a hint of something unreadable in his gaze. Regret? Hope? A quiet understanding of the unusual depth of our brief encounter? Then, with a final lingering look, he turned and walked to his car. I watched him go, the broad shoulders, the confident stride. He opened his door, glanced back one last time, and offered a small, almost imperceptible nod. I mirrored it, a silent farewell, or perhaps a silent promise of future hellos. I got into my car, the interior feeling strangely cold and empty after the warmth of our conversation. My hands were still tingling from his touch. My mind was reeling, replaying every word, every glance, every shared laugh. I started the engine, pulling out of the rest stop parking lot and heading towards the motel I'd booked just a few miles down the road. But the anonymous motel room didn't feel quite so daunting now. The journey west, which had seemed so solitary and overwhelming just hours before, now felt imbued with a new sense of possibility. As I drove, I pulled out my phone. Liam's number was there, under a new contact. "Liam, rest stop." I smiled. It felt too casual, too fleeting, for the impact he'd already had. I considered changing it, but then decided against it. Let the accidental, improbable origin story stand. It was a perfect encapsulation of how something truly special could begin in the most ordinary and ridiculous of circumstances. My phone buzzed. A text message. From Liam. "Sleep well, Jacob. And maybe next time, remember your pants." A genuine, unrestrained laugh escaped me, filling the quiet confines of my car. I typed back, a wide smile on my face. "No promises. Some things are best left to chance. Good night, Liam." And as I pulled into the motel parking lot, the world felt a little brighter, a little more hopeful, and infinitely more interesting than it had just a few hours ago. The road ahead still stretched long, but now it felt less like an escape, and more like an open invitation. And perhaps, just perhaps, it wasn't a journey I would have to navigate entirely alone. The second glance had turned into something far more significant, something that felt like the beginning of an entirely new chapter, not just for my move to Portland, but for my heart. It wasn't a sunrise that woke me that Saturday, but the soft, steady rhythm of Ethan's breathing next to me. I blinked, the early morning light filtering through the blinds, painting stripes across the ceiling. For a moment, just before my brain fully engaged, there was only this profound sense of peace. That was what Ethan brought into my life. A quiet, grounding peace I hadn't realized I was missing until it was there. A constant presence. We'd fallen into a comfortable routine over the past few months, coffee together in the mornings, sometimes a run in the park, quiet evenings cooking, or just watching a movie draped across the sofa. It felt right, like a puzzle piece I hadn't known existed until it clicked perfectly into place. The memory of that first bizarre encounter at the rest stop, him stepping out of his car in just his boxers, felt like a lifetime ago, a strange, beautiful prologue to everything we were now. I shifted slightly, propping myself on an elbow to look at him. His dark hair was a mess against the pillow, a stray curl falling across his forehead. He looked so relaxed, so utterly himself, and a warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the blankets. I'd grown to love the small details, the way his eyes crinkled when he truly laughed, the slight stubble that sometimes caught the light just so, the scar above his left eyebrow he'd gotten as a kid falling out of a tree. Each one a tiny story, a part of the person I was coming to know so deeply. I reached out, my fingers tracing the line of his jaw, careful not to wake him. He stirred anyway, a soft sigh escaping his lips before his eyes fluttered open. A slow smile spread across his face as he saw me. "Morning," he mumbled, his voice thick with sleep. "Morning, sleepyhead," I replied, leaning in to press a soft kiss to his temple. The scent of him, clean, warm, uniquely Ethan, filled my senses. It was intoxicating in its familiarity. We spent the next few minutes just existing, tangled in sheets and each other, not needing words. It was these moments, these quiet truths, that resonated most profoundly with me. The big gestures were nice, sure, but the comfortable silences, the shared space, the unspoken understanding, that was the bedrock. Eventually, we disentangled and made our way to the kitchen. Ethan started the coffee, and I pulled out the ingredients for pancakes, a Saturday morning ritual we'd established. As I mixed the batter, I found myself watching him. He was humming a low tune, probably something from his endless collection of indie rock, while he set out mugs. Lately, though, I'd noticed a subtle shift in him. Nothing dramatic, just a quietness that would occasionally descend, a slight, faraway look in his eyes. It was like a barely perceptible hum beneath the surface of his usual calm. He was still attentive, still engaged, but sometimes, during a quiet moment, I'd catch him lost in thought, a faint shadow passing over his features. I hadn't pushed it. I believed in giving people space, especially when they weren't ready to share. But my curiosity was growing, intertwined with a gentle concern. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light as I poured batter onto the hot griddle. He turned, a mug in each hand, and offered me a small, slightly forced smile. "Yeah, absolutely. Why?" "Just, you seem a little preoccupied sometimes," I said, trying to choose my words carefully. "Lost in your head." He shrugged, setting the mugs down. "Just work stuff, you know? Deadlines, the usual." He busied himself with the sugar and syrup, avoiding my gaze. I let it go for now. He wasn't lying exactly, but I knew him well enough by now to know when he was deflecting. Work stress was real, of course, but this felt different. It felt older, deeper than a recent project. We ate our pancakes, chatted about mundane things, plans for the day, a funny video I'd seen online, the terrible traffic I'd hit coming home from work Friday. But the small, almost imperceptible distance I'd sensed between us lingered in my mind. It wasn't a wall, not yet, but a fine, transparent veil. Later that afternoon, we were curled up on the sofa, a documentary playing quietly in the background, when Ethan's phone buzzed. He picked it up, glanced at the screen, and I saw his jaw clench, almost imperceptibly. His fingers hovered over the screen. Then he sighed, a deep, weary sound, and put the phone back down, face first, on the cushion beside him. "Everything all right?" I asked again, my voice softer this time. He hesitated, then shook his head. No, not really. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I recognized as a sign of frustration. It's an old thing, nothing to worry about. But he looked worried. His shoulders were tense, his brow furrowed. I reached out and gently took his hand, intertwining my fingers with his. His skin felt cool, despite the warmth of the room. Hey, I said softly, turning to face him fully. Whatever it is, you don't have to carry it alone. You know that, right? He looked at me then, and in his eyes I saw a flicker of something I hadn't seen before. A vulnerability that went beyond the casual sharing we'd already done. It was raw, unpolished. He took a deep breath. It's my mom. She wants me to come home. My grandmother isn't doing well, and she's got it in her head that I need to be there to talk sense into my aunt about something. He sighed, scrubbing a hand over his face. It's this whole family drama thing that's been simmering for years, and now with Nana being sick, it's all blowing up again. My mom always tries to put me in the middle, like I'm some kind of mediator or something. I squeezed his hand. That sounds tough. Family stuff always is. He nodded, but the expression on his face told me there was more to it than just a typical family squabble. It's not just that, it just brings up a lot. My family dynamic has always been a bit complicated. My parents had a messy divorce, and I always felt like I had to be the responsible one, the one who held things together for my mom. He paused, looking away. And then there's Mark. The name hung in the air, heavy and unfamiliar. I knew he'd had relationships before me, of course, but he hadn't mentioned anyone by name, hadn't delved into the specifics. My stomach tightened slightly, a prickle of an emotion I didn't immediately recognize. Was it jealousy? No, not exactly. More like a protective instinct, a sudden awareness of a wound I hadn't known existed. Mark? I prompted, gently. Ethan took another shaky breath. He was my first serious boyfriend, years ago. We were together for about 3 years. He looked at me, his gaze searching. He was complicated, charming, brilliant, but also really manipulative. He had this way of making me feel like everything was my fault, that I was lucky to have him. He isolated me from my friends, made me question everything. His voice was low, almost a whisper. The family drama thing with my mom and aunt. Mark used to thrive on that kind of chaos. He'd egg it on, then make me feel like I was the problem for wanting peace. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. Emotional manipulation. It was insidious, damaging. I could only imagine how deeply that kind of experience would cut, especially when you're young and trusting. It ended badly, he continued, his eyes fixed on some point beyond my shoulder. I finally found the courage to leave, but it took a lot out of me. It made me wary of getting close to people, of trusting my own judgment. It made me think that maybe I was just drawn to drama, or that I'd always end up in situations where I had to be the fixer. He finally looked at me, his gaze vulnerable, almost pleading. And now, with my mom bringing up all this family stuff and pushing me to get involved, it just feels like I'm back in that same headspace, like I'm being pulled into something I don't want to be a part of, and I feel guilty for not wanting to go. It just reminds me of how I used to feel with Mark, always trying to fix things for him, always feeling like I was failing. My heart ached for him. It wasn't just about a past relationship, it was about the lingering scars, the way old patterns could resurface and trigger deep-seated anxieties. This wasn't just surface level. This was the quiet truth of Ethan's past, laid bare, and it demanded more than just a casual response. A wave of emotions washed over me. Empathy, certainly, but also a fierce protectiveness. I wanted to tell him that he was nothing like that he was strong and kind and deserved only good things, but I knew platitudes wouldn't cut it. He needed to be heard, truly heard, without judgment. I tightened my grip on his hand. Ethan, Thank you for telling me. That sounds incredibly difficult, and I can only imagine how hard it must be to feel those old feelings creeping back in. I paused, choosing my words carefully. You're not obligated to fix anyone else's problems, especially when it costs you your own peace. And you're certainly not responsible for past patterns you didn't even recognize at the time. Mark sounds like he was really damaging, and it takes incredible strength to walk away from someone like that. He was quiet, just looking at me, his eyes searching. I could almost see the questions in them. Do you understand? Do you think less of me? Are you going to run? I needed to reassure him, not just with words, but with my presence. I leaned closer, resting my head against his. Listen, you've come so far. You're not the same person you were then, and I know you, Ethan. You're one of the most grounded, steady people I've ever met. Don't let anyone, especially not old ghosts, tell you differently. A shiver ran through him, and he leaned into my touch. It's just... Sometimes it feels like I'm not really free of it, like I'm always on guard. That's understandable, I said, stroking his arm. Healing isn't a straight line, but you don't have to do it alone anymore. And you certainly don't have to go back into that family situation if it's going to trigger all that old pain. You have every right to protect yourself. The weight in the room, which had felt so heavy moments before, began to lighten just a fraction. He shifted, turning more fully towards me, his arms snaking around my waist. He buried his face in my shoulder, and I held him close, feeling the steady thrum of his heartbeat against my chest. I hate that I'm bringing this to you, he murmured into my shirt. Don't you dare say that, I replied immediately, my voice firm but gentle. This is us, Ethan. All of it. The good, the messy, the complicated. That's what being in a relationship means. You've let me in on a part of your life that's clearly painful, and that's a huge act of trust. I don't take that lightly. And I didn't. This was it. This was the moment where our relationship deepened, where it moved beyond the easy joy and into the more complex, more profound territory of true partnership. It asked for more from me, yes, but it also offered more. A deeper understanding, a stronger bond. As I held him, a memory surfaced, unbidden, from my own past. A relationship years ago. One that had ended with a crushing sense of betrayal and a vow that I'd never let myself be that vulnerable again. For a long time, I'd kept people at arm's length, content with superficial connections, scared of the intimacy that could lead to pain. I'd told myself it was self-preservation, but really, it was just fear. Ethan had chipped away at that fear, slowly, gently, without even realizing it. He'd made me feel safe enough to open up, to trust, to truly feel again. And now, seeing his own vulnerability, his own pain, it solidified something within me. This wasn't just about me receiving comfort from him. It was about me giving it, stepping up, being the safe harbor he needed. You know, I began, my voice a little rougher than I intended. I've got my own scars. For a long time, I thought if I just kept my guard up, if I didn't let anyone really in, I could avoid getting hurt. I paused, taking a breath. There was someone before you, years ago. I thought we had something special, but it turned out he was not who I thought he was. He ended up leaving, pretty abruptly, for someone else, and it just flattened me. For years after that, I just dated, casually. Never let anyone get close enough to see the real me, because the real me felt too fragile, too easily broken. I felt Ethan shift, lifting his head to look at me, his eyes mod and attentive. This was hard, peeling back those layers, exposing a vulnerability I usually kept locked down. But seeing his honesty, I knew I had to reciprocate. It felt like an offering, a way to show him that he wasn't alone in his past pain. That's why that rest stop encounter, when I first saw you, I continued, a faint smile touching my lips at the memory. It was so completely out of left field, so unexpected. And then, everything that followed, it just felt easy, natural, like I didn't have to work so hard to be myself. You broke down a lot of walls I didn't even realize I had anymore. Ethan's hand came up to cup my cheek, his thumb gently stroking my skin. His gaze was incredibly tender. "Jacob," he whispered, the sound of my name a soft caress. I had no idea. "Well, you know now," I said, a slight shrug. "The point is, we all carry stuff, and it's okay to acknowledge it. It doesn't make us weak. It makes us human. And it certainly doesn't make us unlovable." I looked directly into his eyes, hoping he could see the sincerity there. If anything, knowing this about you, seeing your honesty and your strength in facing it, it just makes me care about you even more. A tear tracked down his cheek, quickly followed by another. He wasn't crying in distress, though, but with a kind of quiet relief. He leaned into me again, pressing his face into my neck. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for understanding, and for sharing that with me." We stayed like that for a long time, just holding each other, the weight of our shared vulnerabilities creating a new, deeper intimacy between us. The documentary on the TV continued to play, forgotten. The afternoon light softened, casting long shadows across the living room. After a while, Ethan pulled back, wiping his eyes. He looked lighter, a subtle release of tension in his shoulders. "So, about my mom and my aunt," he said, a faint, wry smile on his face. "I think I'm going to call her, tell her I can't be there, and that I'm not getting involved in the drama. It feels scary, but also right, like setting a boundary I should have set years ago." "Good," I said, squeezing his hand again. "That's incredibly brave, and I'll be right here, cheering you on. If you need me to, I can even be a convenient excuse. Oh, I can't. Jacob and I have plans to paint a wall, or count dust bunnies." He chuckled, a genuine, warm sound that filled the room. "Dust bunnies, huh? That's a good one." He looked at me, a playful glint in his eyes that I hadn't seen since the phone call earlier. "Maybe we could just hide out together for the weekend. No dust bunnies required." "Sounds like a plan to me," I replied, a smile blooming on my face. We spent the rest of the evening doing just that, hiding out. We ordered takeout, watched a terrible romantic comedy we both secretly loved, and talked. Not about heavy things, not constantly, but about simple, everyday joys. And in between the laughter and the comfortable silences, there was a new understanding, a new foundation laid. Later, as we lay in bed, the city lights a soft glow outside our window, Ethan reached for my hand. He linked our fingers, a familiar comfort, but tonight it felt different. It felt stronger, more deliberate. "Jacob," he whispered, turning to face me in the dim light. I'm really falling for you, more than I thought possible." My heart skipped a beat. He hadn't said it quite like that before, not with that level of open, tender vulnerability. The words felt like a soft caress against my soul. "I'm falling for you too, Ethan," I confessed, my voice barely audible. "Hard, deeper than I ever expected." He leaned in, his lips finding mine in a slow, tender kiss. It wasn't a kiss of passion, not yet, but one of profound connection, of shared vulnerability and quiet promises. It was a kiss that acknowledged the weight of our pasts and the hopeful, brave step we were taking into our future, together. As I held him close, his head resting on my chest, I reflected on the journey. From a strange, almost absurd encounter at a rest stop, to this moment of profound intimacy, sharing the quiet truths of our lives. It wasn't always easy, I knew that. Relationships were complex, messy, and sometimes painful. But with Ethan, I felt a strength, a resonance that transcended the surface. We weren't just two individuals anymore. We were becoming something new, something stronger, forged in the fires of shared experience and honest vulnerability. And as I drifted off to sleep, with Ethan warm and safe in my arms, I knew with absolute certainty that this was exactly where I was meant to be. The scent of stale coffee and my own lingering doubt clung to me like a shroud. I was back in my apartment, the one I'd fled from in such a flurry of misplaced optimism, now feeling smaller and colder than I remembered. A week. It had been a week since Alex and I had stood on that windswept overlook, the world stretched out before us, and somehow we'd both managed to look past each other. "You have to decide, Jacob," he'd said, his voice unusually quiet, devoid of its usual steady warmth. "This isn't a game, and it's not just a summer fling for me. I need to know you're in this, truly in it." And I, the man who'd bared his soul and most of his skin at a rest stop, had faltered. I'd stammered something about needing to think, needing to figure out my own life, my own path. The words felt hollow as they left my lips, tasting like ash. What path? My path had veered wildly off course the moment his eyes, a startling shade of blue, had met mine across the asphalt. Now, sitting on my worn sofa, surrounded by the familiar objects of my old life, I felt utterly lost. The vibrant colors of our shared adventure had faded, replaced by the muted tones of introspection and regret. I missed the way his hand felt in mine, the easy rhythm of his breathing next to me at night, the way he could make me laugh even when I was convinced the world was ending. I missed the way he saw me, truly saw me, beyond the impulsive guy who stepped out of his car in boxer briefs. He saw the fears, the hopes, the underlying currents of vulnerability I usually kept hidden beneath layers of wit and casual indifference. My phone sat accusingly on the coffee table, a black rectangle of silence. I'd expected him to call, to chase, to argue, but he hadn't. And I, too proud or too scared, hadn't called him either. It was a stalemate, and my heart felt like the battlefield. I walked to the window, gazing down at the bustling street below. People moved with purpose, their lives seemingly linear, predictable. Mine felt like a series of detours, and Alex had been the most beautiful, terrifying detour of all. He wasn't just a stop along the way. He was the destination I hadn't known I was searching for. Memories flickered, sharp and vivid. The first time he'd cooked for me, a simple pasta dish, but prepared with such care and focus, as if each noodle was a precious artifact. The way he'd listened, really listened, when I talked about my fractured family history, my dreams that felt too big to hold. The quiet strength in his eyes when I confessed my fear of commitment, a fear that had haunted me through every brief, unsatisfying relationship before him. And that was the crux, wasn't it? Commitment. The word felt like a heavy anchor, yet with Alex, it had begun to feel like a lifeline. He wasn't asking for me to erase my past, but to build a future. He wasn't asking for perfection, but for honesty. And I, in my panic, had given him neither. I thought about the night we'd slept under a blanket of stars, tucked away in a quiet corner of a national park. He'd told me about his own past, a previous relationship that had ended painfully, leaving him cautious but not closed off. He'd talked about his dreams of opening a small workshop, crafting furniture by hand, connecting with nature. His dreams were grounded, tangible, while mine often felt like wisps of smoke. But somehow our different trajectories had aligned, creating a shared horizon. The silence in my apartment pressed in, amplifying my thoughts. This wasn't thinking, this was wallowing. I needed to act. But what? My fear of rejection was a cold knot in my stomach. What if he'd moved on? What if my hesitation had been the final straw? I picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over his contact. Alex. Just his name, simple and strong. I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry. What would I even say? Hey, remember that time I messed up everything? No, I needed to be authentic as the moment I'd stepped out of my car, unburdened by pretense. I needed to show him, not just tell him. An idea sparked, tentative at first, then growing into a burning resolve. I remembered a conversation we'd had on one of our long drives. He'd talked about a small independent bookstore he loved, a place with worn wooden floors and the scent of old paper, nestled in a town a few hours north of where I was. He'd mentioned they were hosting an author signing this weekend for a poet he admired. He hadn't thought I'd be interested in poetry, but I'd surprised him by asking questions, genuinely curious about what moved him. It was a long shot. He might not even be there. But it was a place he loved, a place that held meaning for him. It was a start. My hands trembled slightly as I booked a train ticket. This wasn't just about finding Alex. It was about finding myself again. The self who had dared to be vulnerable, who had dared to hope. The journey north was a blur of shifting landscapes, each passing tree and field mirroring the turmoil in my mind. I rehearsed speeches, discarded them, then started again. I imagined every possible scenario. Alex turning me away. Alex already with someone new. Alex forgiving me instantly. My stomach churned with a mixture of dread and anticipation. When I finally stepped off the train, the air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine. The town was quaint, exactly as he'd described it. Brick buildings, colorful flower boxes, and a clock tower chiming softly. I found the bookstore tucked away on a side street, its display window filled with stacks of books and a chalkboard announcing the poet's name. Taking a deep breath, I pushed open the door. The familiar scent of paper and old wood enveloped me, comforting and intimidating all at once. The store was busy, people milling about, chatting quietly. My eyes scanned the crowd, a frantic search for that familiar, reassuring presence. And then I saw him. He was standing near a bookshelf filled with travel guides, his back to me, engrossed in a conversation with an older woman. His dark hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck, and even from behind, I recognized the set of his shoulders, the way he held himself with quiet strength. My heart leaped, then pounded against my ribs. I took a shaky breath and started to move towards him, my legs feeling like lead. Each step was a battle against my own insecurities, against the voice in my head telling me to turn and run, but I kept going. I had to. He turned as if sensing my presence, and his eyes, those incredible blue eyes, met mine. For a split second, recognition, surprise, and something I couldn't quite decipher flickered across his face. The woman he was talking to offered a polite smile and excused herself, leaving us in a pool of silence that felt heavier than anything I'd ever known. "Jacob?" His voice was a low murmur, hesitant, almost a question. I nodded, unable to speak, my throat tight. He looked me up and down, a flicker of something unreadable in his gaze. "What are you doing here?" I came for you," I finally managed, the words a desperate whisper. He raised an eyebrow, a hint of his usual wry humor surfacing, though it was tinged with caution. "Took you long enough." That small hint of a joke, even a pointed one, was a tiny crack in the wall between us, and I lunged for it. "I know, I'm an idiot, a colossal, spectacular idiot." He chuckled softly, and the sound was like music. I've heard worse. "Alex," I began, stepping closer, needing him to understand the depth of my regret, the sincerity of my presence. "I'm sorry. I was scared. Terrified, actually. Everything was happening so fast, and I've never felt this way before. It's intense, and it's wonderful, and it just made me shut down." His eyes softened, losing some of their guardedness. "Scared of what, Jacob?" "Scared of everything," I admitted, my voice raw. Scared of losing what we had before I even fully understood what it was, and scared of what it means to actually be in something real, something deep. My life has always been about movement, about not settling, and you felt like settling, but not in a bad way, in a finally finding a place to stay way. He listened, really listened, his gaze unwavering. "And you didn't like that?" "No!" I exclaimed, perhaps a little too loudly for a bookstore. A few patrons glanced our way. I lowered my voice. "No, I loved it. That's what scared me. It was too good. I ran. I ran because I was afraid of getting hurt, afraid of not being enough, afraid of letting myself want something so much that it could break me. He reached out slowly and took my hand, his fingers warm and strong against mine. My breath hitched. Jacob, you already are enough, more than enough. I know that now, I said, looking into his eyes, feeling the weight of my past fears lift, replaced by the certainty of my feelings. Being away from you this past week, it's been hell. Everything felt dull, colorless. I realized that my life, without you in it, is just a series of stops, but with no real destination. You're my destination, Alex. You're my home. A slow smile spread across his face, lighting up his eyes. That's a big statement, Jacob. It's a big feeling, I countered, squeezing his hand. I'm not asking you to forget my fear or my past mistakes, but I'm here now, fully. I want to build something with you. A life, a home, whatever that looks like. I want to face the scary parts, the unknown, all of it, as long as I'm doing it with you. He pulled me gently towards him, his hand finding the small of my back, drawing me into a soft embrace. His scent, a mix of old books, fresh air, and something uniquely Alex, enveloped me, filling the empty spaces inside me. I was worried, he confessed, his voice muffled against my hair, worried that I'd pushed too hard, that our whole crazy beginning was just that, a beginning, but not an ongoing story. It's an ongoing story, I whispered, pulling back just enough to look at him. A messy, beautiful, perfectly imperfect, ongoing story. And I want to write every chapter with you. He kissed me then, right there in the middle of the bookstore. A soft, tender kiss that spoke volumes. It wasn't the fiery, passionate kiss of our early days, but one imbued with understanding, forgiveness, and a deep, abiding affection. It was a kiss of commitment. When we finally broke apart, a few lingering patrons were smiling discreetly, but I didn't care. The world had narrowed to just Alex and me. So, he said, a playful glint in his eyes, does this mean you're going to be okay with my terrible taste in poetry? I laughed, a genuine, joyful sound that felt like it had been trapped inside me for a week. I'll even buy you the signed copy if you promise to read me your favorites. Deal, he said, his smile widening, but on one condition. Name it. No more running, not from me, not from yourself, and definitely not from the possibility of something truly wonderful. Never again, I promised, my voice firm, sure. I'm here, and I'm staying. We spent the rest of the afternoon at the bookstore, listening to the poet read, hand in hand. I found myself actually enjoying the lyrical verses, seeing them through Alex's appreciative eyes. We talked about everything we'd left unsaid during our week apart, about the fears that had almost driven us away, and the profound longing that had ultimately pulled us back together. Later, over a warm meal at a small diner, we started to talk about the future. It wasn't about grand, sweeping plans, but small, deliberate steps. Alex told me about a vacant storefront he'd seen for his workshop, how he'd hesitated to pursue it, feeling like his life was still in flux. It's not in flux anymore, I said, reaching across the table to cover his hand with mine. It's settling, in the best possible way. Show me this storefront. Let's look at it together. His eyes lit up. You mean it? I mean it, I confirmed. Maybe I can help you with the design, the marketing. My old life might have felt directionless, but I have skills, Alex. Skills I want to use to build something with you. It felt liberating to say it out loud, to commit to something tangible, something that blended our individual dreams into a shared vision. My old apartment, my old job, they suddenly felt like distant relics. They had served their purpose, but they weren't my home anymore. Home was wherever Alex was. We decided to spend the night in the small town. Walking hand in hand through the quiet streets after dinner, the stars already twinkling in the darkening sky, I felt a profound sense of peace. This wasn't the open road, wild and unpredictable, but it was just as beautiful, just as full of promise. It was the quiet, steady beauty of building something real. In our rented room, we talked late into the night. We talked about our quirks, our pet peeves, the things that made us laugh. We talked about the challenges we knew we'd face, the compromises we'd inevitably have to make. But this time, there was no fear in the discussion, only a mutual understanding and a shared determination. You know, Alex said, tracing patterns on my arm as I lay next to him, feeling more content than I had in years, that day at the rest stop. When you got out of your car in just your underwear? I chuckled, remembering the sheer impulsiveness of it, my finest moment. It was, he agreed, his voice soft. It was the most honest thing I'd ever seen. You stripped away all the pretense, all the layers, and just were. That's what drew me to you, Jacob. That raw honesty. Don't ever lose that. I won't, I promised, turning to face him, my heart full. Especially not with you. You make it easy to be myself. He smiled, a gentle, knowing smile. And you, Jacob, you make me believe in unexpected journeys, in finding beauty in the most ordinary of places, and in taking a chance on something that feels right, even if it started with a man in his underwear at a rest stop. We fell asleep in each other's arms, the silence between us no longer heavy with unspoken words, but filled with the quiet hum of two souls finally finding their rhythm. The next morning, we drove back to my city, but it wasn't a retreat. It was a strategic regrouping. We packed my belongings, making decisions together about what to keep, what to discard. It felt less like moving out and more like moving on together. As we drove towards the town where Alex envisioned his workshop and where we'd begin to build our lives, I looked out the window. The highway stretched before us, familiar yet transformed. It was no longer a symbol of restless wandering, but a bridge to a future I now eagerly embraced. I knew there would be bumps in the road, challenges we hadn't even considered yet. But this time I wouldn't run. I had found my Alex, and in doing so, I had found my strength, my purpose, and most importantly, my place. A place to stay. And it was right here, next to him,